Awesome. Hello, everybody. Happy Tuesday. I have to get better at kind of remembering what day it is. I used to do these only on Thursday, and now I'm having a hard time. What day of the week is it? Might also be because the end of school is coming. Hope everybody is surviving the end of the school year here. My name is Rosalie Prendergast. I'm a board certified behavior analyst at a really small practice. There's actually only 9 of us. At Eclipse Therapy in Evergreen, Colorado, hey from California. Please do feel free to comment in the chat, say hi, where you're from. Feel free to ask questions as well in the chat. Please do use the chat to ask questions. I know there's an ask a question button down at the bottom, but if you use that ask a question button, I have a hard time seeing it when I'm presenting the PDF that I have prepared for you guys today. So again, welcome parents, welcome clinicians. You know, this is a really open forum. You know, feel free to ask your questions. There's no question too small. They're all really important questions. Some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today about inhibiting gets a little bit clinical. So feel free to ask questions if language that I'm using isn't helpful. I'm always happy to talk more about it and clarify. So that PDF is, again, in the green button that's below me, and we will jump in and get started with our shared purpose matrix. I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. All right. And just for clinicians, make sure you guys know this isn't a CEU. I realized that I should probably separate my channels, like parent channel and clinician channel, but it's nice to have everybody all together. So today we're talking about that impulsive domino chain, right? Where it's so hard to stop once it starts, right? How do we develop that pause button, that stop button, that real kind of true problem solving, right? Or giving ourselves the time to support problem solving, right? How do we pause that domino chain before the whole thing of dominoes is gone? I know I've certainly set up a lot of things of dominoes in my day, and man, it's so frustrating when you hit one and the whole thing goes bam. And I feel like when we're talking about impulsive behavior, that is so hard because it happens all the time. You're like, man, I'm just not quite there, right? I'm not quite on it. So when we think about this impulsive behavior, I'm going to start down here in this kind of lower right hand quadrant of our shared purpose matrix. This is part of acceptance and commitment therapy. I feel like it's a great forum to use for your entire family, for yourself. It supports noticing kind of what's important to you, kind of from that mental experiencing side of things, which is the bottom part of our matrix, and kind of contacting that present moment, that kind of 5 senses experiencing, as well as noticing emotions and behaviors that we use in the presence of these emotions as they show up. So the first question I'm going to ask is, who or what is important to you in our shared purpose today? And I'm going to say our children, parents, clinicians. I'm going to say teachers are important in this discussion. I think households, right? Everyone in that household, that whole kind of group of people, our cultures are important in this discussion. Our biases that we hold around kind of how children are supposed to act, what we've grown up with. I think other therapists, right, like OT, SLP are important in this conversation. PTs, right, we hear about it all the time. Man, they're just so impulsive. I can't get anything done, right? It's over here, it's over there, it's everywhere, right? We can't get anything done. I guess efficiency is something that's important, right? How do we operate efficiently? All right, I'm going to pop over to this kind of lower left-hand corner, which is what yucky stuff shows up and gets in the way. And I think the first thing when I think about impulsive behavior that gets in the way is anger, right? Like I get so mad. It's like, really? You couldn't pause? Like you're touching everything. Why does everything have to go in your mouth? Why can't you clean up one thing before you move on to the next? You know, I just walk around kind of cleaning up mess after mess after mess after mess. With that comes kind of anxiety about what that's going to be like. Can I catch it fast enough? I think other things that show up are old rules, right? Or kind of even a little bit of like depression, like how come I can't fix? Yeah, lack of patience, for sure. A little bit of depression, right? Like this is so hard to do. Lack of patience. That for sure will show up during this conversation around kind of impulsivity. I think a little bit of kind of hopelessness shows up too. Like, am I ever going to get there, right? Are we ever going to get that tiny spot where we can teach that pause, where we can help with that pause? All right, a lot of yucky stuff shows up. I'm going to kind of keep moving. What behaviors will I see or hear you using to get relief from that yucky stuff? And I think with this impulsivity, kind of the stop megaphone is on all the time, right? Like stop yelling, you know, like yelling stop, or kind of following closely, right? So that you can physically support if you need to, right? If impulsivity comes out when we're playing with peers, right? Like it's that hover moment, right? Where I don't want you to, that mad emotion to show up for you and you're just going to haul off and, you know, hit one of your friends, and then, you know, and then you're kind of embarrassed and your worried emotion shows up and you're, you know, sad that happened. So following closely, adult beverages after the kids have gone to bed, right? Maybe a little bit of yoga is a helpful move, right? Maybe over researching. Like, I've got to find the cure, man. Maybe if I take this dye out of the diet, if I try this code word, you know, I get this, you know, this specific feather from this bird is going to go under this. Maybe some superstition goes in there. And I think, oh, there we go. I was going to say, I don't think my spell checker is working. So you might see or hear lots of kind of behaviors for us to get relief from that yucky stuff that shows up. I'm going to move on over to what behaviors will I see or hear you using to move towards what's important to you, right? And what's really important to us is developing that pause button, right? Supporting our children, supporting our family unit as functioning together. You know, that culture that we have, other people that support our child. And I think collaborating is one of the things I think about first. Collaborating with others, anybody having success. Oh, collaborating, being willing to go outside the box. Right? Can we think about something that's different, right? That we haven't tried? Being willing to jump outside of that box for answers. I actually saw a really great quote today that was like, all of the problems that we experience aren't going to be fixed with kind of the brain that we had when the problems were caused, right? So how are we going to think outside of the box? Can we also get uncomfortable? Right? Is there a time for us to sit in that uncomfortable space to see if we can get some growth, to see if we can have something else pop in? I think other things are really just having patience that something's going to come, right? It's coming. Having patience. All right. And talking, right? Talk to others, talk about it. Keep going, keep generating ideas, and work together with your kiddo. And I think another huge thing, and we're going to talk about this a lot today, is shifting to building behavior. right? Instead of kind of taking this eliminative approach, really shifting to taking this, how am I going to build behaviors to support this skill challenge that they have that's really wreaking havoc on their life, our life, together. All right, I for sure know I'm going to have a chance noticing this stuff showing up. Hopefully you guys will too. If you want more information on the ACT matrix, you can check out Matrix Talk on Crowdcast. This is a really fabulous noticing tool. A lot of families that we support use this at the dinner table, use this as a problem-solving tool. So if you want more information, please feel free, jump on a couple of their Crowdcasts. It's really wonderful. Actually, it's how I found out about Crowdcast. All right, we're going to do a quick loop around the noticing grid, which is the happy medium approach point of view. You're going to hear language from this noticing grid throughout the talk today, because this noticing grid is a multi-purpose tool. It supports us in recognizing levels of regulation. That's our noticing level, right? Level 1 is just right, matching the environment engaged. It's critical to remember there are no lists of behaviors that fit or strategies that fit in any of these categories. This is truly individualized. What does your child or what do you look like when you're matching the environment, right? There's a whole kind of range of behaviors that match specific contexts, and you could fall in any one of those, right? You could be on the bigger side of things. You could be on the smaller side of things. You could be smack dab in the middle. But what do you look like when you are matching the context around you? When we move up to a level 2, we're starting to become dysregulated. We may be contacting things that are a little aversive in the environment for us, right? We start moving a little bit too fast or a little bit too slow. What does that look like, right? What do you look like when you're starting to become a little bit dysregulated? And then our level 3 is when we're in fight, flight, freeze, collapse. Total, we are on kind of that level where we don't want to be, right? That level 3 is not livable. Those are our big dangerous behaviors, right? Running, eloping out of sight, running away, hitting, kicking, biting, pulling hair, things that are dangerous, right? Dangerous and unsafe. Our next column over is what people will see. We want to outline what the individual looks like when they're becoming escalated, right? What are those stages of escalation so that we can offer support quickly? We don't want kids living in fight, flight, freeze. We know learning does not occur at a level 3. That is survival mode. Nothing good happens there. Everybody's feeling heavy emotions, and it's not helpful all around. So we want really clear indicators. What do they look like when they're matching, right? What do they look like when they're starting to get dysregulated so that we can support them? Our next column over is what other people will do. These are our supportive strategies. These are our connection strategies. These are our joy-bringing strategies. When the individual is already at a level 1, how are we going to support them in staying there? What things are we going to do that's going to help them stay regulated and matching their environment, right? Environments change all the time. How are we going to support them in noticing those shifts and making those adjustments to their behavior so that it still works for the context? At our level 2, these are our we've caught you, right? We want to help you when you're getting just a little bit dysregulated. How are we going to support you? How are we going to get you back to regulated? And how are we going to do that in a way that's kind, helpful, and supports you in still feeling that connection with us? Level 3 is obviously maintaining safety, right? When an individual is hit, fight, flight, freeze, obviously we want to try to avoid that. But if we can't, right, if it happens, because it does sometimes, how are we going to support them in maintaining safety? Safety is number 1. All right, our next column over, these are our skills that we want to build. When an individual is already at a 1, how are we going to keep them there, right? How are they going to deploy skills that help them sustain matching the context around them, that ever-changing context? Level 2, how can they support themselves in getting back to that level 1? What are those tools that they can deploy themselves with autonomy, right? If they need some support, that's okay. Most of us don't live 100% independently. We have people around us that help us. But what are those skills that we want you to have so that you can get back to a level 1? And at level 3, how are we going to teach you how to stay safe? So this one-page document becomes kind of a parent like cheat sheet. Here are all of our options for supportive strategies. This is what our kiddo looks like when they're beginning to escalate. This is what they look like when they're just right. Like, for example, I had a new kiddo I started working with, and he actually frowns when he's at a level 1. A lot of people thought that he was starting to get dysregulated, so they were starting to move faster around him, and that was actually very dysregulating to him. So once we put frown at that level 1, we had much more success for that individual. So that's just an example of how this gets individualized so that people can tell, right? Because normally frowning means I'm starting to feel a heavy emotion, better do something about this, right? Hey, Betsy. So anyway, our noticing grid can serve so many purposes. That behavior intervention cheat sheet, that escalation curve, our supportive strategies, and the skills that we're trying to support that individual in learning. All right, that's a quick sort of loop around the noticing grid. Next, we're going to talk about our DNAV characters. The noticing grid from the beginning, again, that is a psychological flexibility tool from acceptance and commitment therapy. These DNAV characters are also another part of psychological flexibility. And this program, in particular, you can go to dnavinternational.com. This was developed for adolescents. One of their first books out was called The Thriving Adolescent, and they use these characters to support psychological well-being, coming kind of from that psychological flexibility lens, acceptance and commitment therapy, and positive psychology as well. So there's also, if you have a littler individual, there's a program now called Connect, PSHE out of the UK, that utilizes these characters, but is for more littles. And their subscription to their curriculum, which is used in UK kind of pre-K and elementary education, it's like $180 a year. It's actually a wonderful thing to engage with and support their basically program. It's just absolutely fantastic. Sorry, I kind of lost my words there. All right. So let's do a quick loop around kind of these DNAV characters, and then we're going to get into some strategies kind of for this impulsivity. So our discoverer, right, involves broadening and, oh, for sure. Yep, I can pull a link up for you and put that in the chat in a second. So I'll put it in at the end. So once I kind of finish going through, or we hit 5 o'clock, I'll put those links in so that you guys can have them. So our discoverer is our character that supports kind of broadening your skills, right? Stepping into the uncomfortable, increasing your social connections, leaving that comfort zone, and trying things by trial and error, right? So this is going out and discovering, right? Like, how did this work for me? Did I like it? Did I not like it? Right? That's that trial and error learning. And sometimes, right, when we've got a really impulsive individual, that discoverer is super overactive, right? It's like everything's new. Everything's trial and error learning. Come on, let's go. Let's do it. Which can be really helpful at times, but also really not helpful. And we'll get into that more. Our advisor is our inner voice, right? Our inner critic, our inner coach, thinking about what we did, right? And oftentimes in our impulsive guys, the advisor is not so active in some ways, and then in other ways, super overactive too, right? So we've got a little bit of a balancing act to do here. The discoverer and advisor kind of go together. Most of the time, an individual is kind of stepping into that discovered space to then talk to the advisor about, hey, how did that turn out for us? Can you store this so we can be a little bit more efficient later? right? Like helpful rules. How do we stay safe when we're crossing the street? Look both ways, right? Our valuer, that is like, why do we behave? What in the world do we even care about? Like, why is inhibiting important to us in the first place, right? Do we want connections with friends, right? Do we want to have that relationship with our parents? Like, what is it? Do we want access to cool things and toys? Do we want to go to the amusement park, right? What are those things that really make life meaningful and fun to you as an individual? And our noticer, which I think is the cornerstone of all the characters, it notices kind of body sensation showing up, emotion showing up, and the context around us, right? What skill are we going to deploy? If we don't notice, it's really challenging to decide which other character you might want to bring in for support or to help you. So if you have children who love kind of superheroes, you know, sometimes these DNAV characters like really resonate, right? Because you can almost create them into kind of superheroes. And if you want to, you could even rename them, right? To superheroes that are meaningful to your child, but have them serve the same purpose. So that noticer wants you to take that information that your emotions are giving, that you're taking from the context, and decide, how am I going to go out there and act efficiently and effectively, right, without being impulsive, right? There's so much about impulsivity in just these characters. When we pop over to that self view and social view, we're not going to talk so much about them today, but all these guys are so interconnected. You kind of pull from bits and pieces from each character kind of all day as you're working on staying just right, a level 1. With those pops to a 2, we all don't stay perfectly regulated, right? But we're pulling from all of these skills all day to support ourselves in sustaining that level 1 on the noticing grid and matching the context around us. So our self-view helps us break free, right, from those self-limiting beliefs. I don't know how many of your guys say things like, I'm just a terrible kid. All I do is get punished. I can never do anything right, right? That self-view, we want to help them break free from that limiting belief of I can't do anything right. All I do is do things wrong. We want them to see that you are capable of growing, you're capable of improving, you're incapable of changing the direction of things that are going right now. And our social view is how we build those strong connections, right? People are, I love how they say in here, people are our heaven and our hell. They truly are, right? When things are going well, light emotions are showing up, people are amazing, right? Those connections are incredible. When heavy stuff's showing up, that kind of yucky stuff, it's harder, right? We can really tap into these skills to support ourselves in maintaining those connections and growing new ones that are important to us. All right, so those are the guys you're going to kind of hear about today. So when we're thinking about impulsivity, right, often we've got a pretty weak noticer, right? We're not noticing the context around us very much. The discoverer can be a little bit overactive, right? Like, woo, let's go, here we go. And the advisor isn't always available. You're like, man, you know that. But like, why can't we quite tap in to that advisor, right? For that, like even, you know, there'll be things that you teach like rules, like, you know, I don't know how many times I've taught a few individuals, right? Stop at the stop sign on your scooter and look both ways so that you don't get hit by a car, right? You've just said that out loud and you watch them roll up to the stop sign and blow straight through it, right? Like that advisor just isn't available sometimes. So how do we do this? We've kind of got to flip the script, right? We spend so much time talking about stop being so impulsive, right? You see this, you do it, right? There's no pause. You know, you have absolutely no stop button. Like, I wish I could just like, you know, on the back of you, there was a little stop button. If I could catch you, I would want to push that stop button, right? And that fear, that frustration, that worry really shows up because sometimes there isn't enough time to help. Excuse me, I've got a little bit of a cough today. So it's hard to help because there isn't really much of a gap in between when you see them starting to respond impulsively to when they actually do something. So it makes it really hard. So how are we going to kind of flip this script, right? And here, this might get a little bit technical, but we're gonna talk through it. And I think it's very helpful, and I think it's really helpful in talking to other therapists as well. So when we think about, there's kind of two approaches to challenging behavior, and we know that impulsive behavior is really challenging. It wreaks havoc at school, it wreaks havoc at home, it wreaks havoc on family vacations. You know, it's there, right? And it's challenging. So a lot of times we want to take that eliminative approach where it's saying, let's stop this behavior, right? What carrot can I put out there, right? Or what punishment, what stick can I carry to say, hey, like, we are going to get rid of this, right? What kind of coercive tactics, those carrots, those, you know, those point systems, those token systems, you know, those are kind of our go-to right now. And we see a lot of that at school, right? You'll get this many points if you don't do this, right? Or sometimes we flip it around and say, you know, if you can stop yourself. But again, that's still eliminative. We're trying to stop the behavior that we don't like, right? It emphasizes that what should you not do, right? We don't really identify that much. Like, we say, hey, I don't want you to do that and I want you to stop, right? But what actually should they be doing, right? What do you want your child to actually do when they are not acting impulsively, right? What do we want them to do, right? We want them to pause. We want them to use their noticer. We want them to get those noticer goggles out and kind of like check out what's going on, right? Those are some things that we want them to do, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So we want to flip the script to this more constructional approach, right? Where we're constructing the behaviors that we want to see, right? So we don't want to see this impulsivity. And instead of kind of thinking we're going to get rid of this, we're going to think about, all right, like, what if this didn't exist, right? What would we see this individual doing? What would this child be doing if this behavior wasn't present? So what can we build, right? So finding those helpful behaviors to build, right? Thinking about, how am I going to reinforce this with positive reinforcement by giving things for seeing those new behaviors that we're constructing, right? Not for just the absence of not inhibiting, right? But like, what are they going to actually do? You actually see them put on their noticer goggles and they get something, right? That is much without planned deprivation, which just means like, we're not hoarding all of the gummy bears and they can only have them, you know, when they demonstrate what we're looking for, right? That's what planned deprivation is when we withhold something. Like, say you can only have video games, you know, when we're practicing this, right? That's planned deprivation. We want to do a lot of modeling in the constructional approach. Like, all right, what is this going to look like? How can we walk through this together, right? How does this tie to your child's values, right? What do they care about in this context? Do they care about those relationships? Do they care about their time on electronics? Do they care about being able to access, like, I don't know, the big thing now out here is like Elitch Gardens. It's a big, you know, like amusement park in Colorado, right? Do they care about accessing that? Do they care about going to the movie theater, right? But, you know, so what is it that they care about what we're trying to build for them, right? And how can we negotiate those kind of things with them, right? How can we create this collaborative plan with them of building these behaviors that we want them to, that we want to see, rather than this other stuff that if they have this, it doesn't really even serve a purpose to be impulsive. Although I will say all of us are a little impulsive sometimes, right? Which is okay. So we don't want to eliminate it completely, but we do want to build up other skills that are going to make them more successful, that get them towards what they care about. and what you guys as a family unit care about. Also, within this constructional approach, we want to be thinking about how many different ways can we teach this, right? How many different ways are there to inhibit? There for sure isn't one, right? There are so many different ways, right? I've been silly putting on my noticer goggles, which is part of that Connect curriculum. Some of my guys have a noticer telescope. Some of them have their binoculars. There's so many different ways that we can be successful in a context by deploying a different behavior, right? So think about what are my child's degrees of freedom, right? How many ways have I given them to be successful in meeting the needs of this context, right? With inhibiting. So how many different ways do they have to do it? And some of these might be conventional that everybody else does, but are there other creative ways that work too? Why not, right? If they work, that's awesome. All right. So the next little kind of shift is, if you guys have worked with behavior analysts, you probably know about antecedent behavior consequence, right? This linear, we've probably asked you to take I don't know, probably a chapter book's worth of ABC data, something like that. But the challenge is sometimes we're not responding to the same ABC, right? ABCs, these contingencies are going on around us all the time, right? Like right now I've got a contingency. I've got construction workers out my window. I have one of my dogs is scratching at the door. My sister-in-law who lives with me just left, right? There's so many contingencies. I'm talking to you guys, right? I'm responding mostly to talking to you guys right now, but you might see me do something that is responding to another contingency that's part of my context right now. So when we get stuck kind of looking at everything in kind of just this linear ABC model, we can miss what our child is responding to. We can miss another contingency that's happening in the environment. So instead of thinking linearly, we try to think about this non-linear contingencies. They're all over the place. So we need to build some skills so we have access to what our child is responding to. And we're going to talk about that in a minute too. But another little shift I want to think about is kind of a lot of us behavior analysts have probably got everybody thinking also those 4 functions, right? Tangible, escape, attention, sensory, right? But sometimes it's bigger than that. It can be multiple functions at one time. So I like to think about things in terms of an appetitive, like, is my child moving towards this interaction, or is this aversive? They're working to get out of it, right? They're earning tokens to get the heck out of there to play their video game, right? Or they're approaching and saying, hey, this is really important to me. Working on my impulsivity is really important to me because it's getting in the way of my relationships with my friends, right? Or I'm always getting yelled at by you, Mom, and I don't like that. I want to have a good relationship with you. Right? So how can we look at if they're moving towards that learning experience or if they're working to get away, right? It's more under that aversive control. All right. So that's kind of our technical jargon for today, but I think some really important technical jargon because this inhibiting behavior is really complex. It isn't super linear all the time. We don't always know kind of what we don't know that straight line sometimes. Sometimes it isn't a straight line. So when we are first kind of starting to think about what are we going to build to support this inhibitory control, we've got to get this down, which is thinking inside your head. Other people cannot hear you. And when you're talking out loud, people can hear you, right? Because if we live in a complex environment, right? With these contingencies all over the place. Pretty soon it's going to be like dog walking hour. So I'm going to have that contingency outside. How many cute dogs do I have to inhibit looking at and saying, oh, that's such a cute Frenchie or, beautiful German Shepherd or whatever, right? So we've got to get them talking out loud about what they're responding to. If we know what they're responding to, we have a much better opportunity of supporting the growth of those skills around kind of inhibitory control, around pausing and noticing, right? But if everything's going on inside their head and we're constantly making guesses, we have no idea. We are like 50 steps behind. So the more we can work on just talking out loud so that we can hear, what are you responding to in the environment? What about this is hard? That can be a huge launching point to this inhibitory control, because sometimes we're making guesses and we got no idea, right? Then we get a kiddo talking out loud and we're like, oh, wow, really? That wasn't at all what we were thinking. So our next step is to really develop that solid noticer, right? And this helpful noticer activity and unhelpful is from that DNAV Thriving Adolescent that I will link to at the end of this for people if they're interested in kind of looking into more of this psychological flexibility resource. But actually, I will say, treating impulsivity just with a very behavioral approach has been way less successful for me than when I had this addition of this psychological flexibility programming. This is when we really were like, wow, we've got this. We've got ideas and tools to support the development of these new skills. So when we kind of go down this noticer skill checklist, if I go down the kind of unhelpful noticer activity first, we've got, I don't know what's going on inside my body, right? Not so helpful. That's the noticer's job, right? Am I hungry, right? I know a lot of individuals who are more impulsive when their basic needs aren't met, right? When they're tired, when they're hungry, when they're hot, when they're thirsty, right? We're going to see a lot more of that behavior. And if we don't start to support them in noticing, right, what those body sensations are so that they can report them, so they can say them out loud, we are still going to see a lot of that, right? I overreact to things, right? I get too big, right? Really fast, right? I go from a level 1 on the noticing grid to a level 3 in a blink of an eye. I don't have much of a level 2. I have a really short fuse, right? I struggle to describe my feelings. Impulsivity often, a lot of times, is about getting relief from an emotion that shows up, whether that be a light emotion, like I'm excited about this, or a heavy emotion, like I'm really angry. You took my toy and I want it back now, right? Another big piece. Oh, there we go. Here comes another contingency. Now my kid and her friends are coming home from school too. There's another contingency, but I let you guys know out loud. So they're going to go have fun and play. So when we're thinking about also those emotions, right, that are really critical for our individuals to be able to notice, to name, to talk about how heavy they are, how light they are, things like that, is also the understanding that even heavy emotions, or negative emotions as they call it in DNAV, the Thriving Adolescent. I moved away from saying negative because in our society that has such a big connotation. I call them heavy now because they're harder to carry. Light emotions are easier to carry, but so many kids become really averse to those heavy emotions because they're labeled as negative, right? So we're told to kind of get away from them. And actually, I'm going to show you guys a quick video from your ACT auntie. That's also a great resource, but it talks about kind of like why our thoughts are so negative, why those emotions that we feel sometimes kind of are negative as well. Or I might just leave it in a link because otherwise I think I'm going to run out of time today, and I'd rather get through what we're doing and you guys can kind of check that out on your own. It is linked down below. So we've got to be really thoughtful about that, right? All emotions deliver information. So when we're like, oh man, being mad is negative, you got to get rid of that, right? We're sending this message, right? That shouldn't show up, right? Instead of saying, hey, I hear you. That mad emotion is here, right? It's like a boomerang. You can try to get away from it, but it's coming back, right? How are you going to carry that and still use behaviors that match who you are and satisfy what you need to have happen around you? So we want to kind of shift that and flip that script too. Emotions are information givers, right? There's some that are easier to carry, some that are harder to carry, right? I have no idea what others are feeling. That's another big noticer skill, right? When we're impulsive, we don't pause to notice how our behavior impacted somebody else, right? I don't know how many times we used to run these perspective taking things outside of an impulsive moment, and the kiddo would get it, right? They would get like, yeah, I make that person feel bad. But in that context, when that emotion shows up and then that impulsive behavior comes out, they aren't paying attention to what's going on for others in that moment, right? Upon reflection, they might be able to do that. But that's where we've got to strengthen that noticer so that they start noticing what's happening in the moment. All right. I get lost inside my head and I don't notice what's going on around me, right? Impulsivity blinders, right? Here we go, right? We are going for all the things that look cool. And we're not noticing anything on the outside, right? We've got those horse blinders on. I hurt myself or do something unhelpful when I have strong feelings, right? That impulsive emotion is a pretty strong feeling, a really strong emotion that oftentimes comes with other emotions, right? So those are all the things you can kind of go down there, like what are the things that my child kind of struggles with? And we've got on the other side, what are we going to build, right? We're going to build awareness of those body sensations, particularly those basic needs that we've seen kind of happen in those contingencies around those impulsive behaviors that show up, right? I can pause and slow myself down. Working on that outside of when we're being impulsive, right? It is so critical to work on these things all the time, not just in the moments when they're hardest and needed, right? We got to practice it when it's easy, right? I can describe my feelings, and I've got a couple of visuals down below that are kind of helpful for building these skills. I allow all my feelings, right? Even those negative ones. I notice how other people feel. Again, peeling off that, those blinders, right? So we're seeing kind of our noticer spotlight is on kind of a bigger array of the environment. Right? I'm good at noticing what's going on, right? I'm good at noticing what's going on around the current environment. And I can ground myself when I have strong feelings, right? I can access help. I can pause when those big feelings are showing up. And obviously, usually it's easier to pause when light emotions are showing up than heavy at first. So, all right. So again, that thinking in your head, talking out loud is huge. We need access, right? We need access to those body sensations that are showing up, those thoughts that are going through our advisor, right? Are we responding to rules? Are we responding to things that are actually happening in the current moment? Are we doing time travel, right? Are we predicting like I'm never going to get a turn with that toy? Am I predicting, like this happened and class ran out of time and I didn't get a turn to be the, tagger and, beanbag pirate, whatever game they're playing, right? Can we identify once we get thinking in our head and talking out loud down, can we start to see patterns of this, right? Can we start to see patterns of what emotions are showing up that co-occur with those impulsive behaviors, right? So we really want them to become, and we as the adults want to become kind of the narrators of the world around us, right? We want to build that contextual awareness. You almost become like, literally the narrator of the world. Like, oh, I see this and that and that. And you're just talking out loud, talking about what you're seeing, building that and widening that lens of contextual awareness, calling attention to different things that you notice as the context changes, right? Be that model, right? We talked about that up in that constructional approach. Be that model. My lens is really wide. I know for me personally, my lens can get really narrow too. And I find when I start being that narrator of the world, that lens widens for me pretty quickly, and it's great. It's really helpful. Next is creating a pause to notice, right? This is like, man, if we could do this, we'd be better, right? But there's a lot more to it. If you can create a pause, that's great. That is a first wonderful step. But there's a lot more that goes into supporting those impulsive behaviors and building new behaviors. But yes, create that pause to notice, physicalize it. I've had kids make actual buttons that they wear, like a pin button, those silly kind of, Staples easy buttons. On Amazon, there are these one-hit speech device buttons that I've actually pinned on kids, and it'll say, we'll do something silly like remember to pause or whatever, like in a funny voice, or using the voice changer apps and stuff. You can come up with something silly that's funny for them. Other kids have wanted a parent reminder on there, like a mom to say, hey, I need some help here, right? Like, and they'll push their button and say, hey, remember, you've got this. Notice what's going on around you. Like almost like a mantra or a helpful phrase. But physicalizing it, having actually something to push, hold, do can be really helpful. Other kiddos I'm like, where on your head is your pause button? And some individuals like to create that. They like to think about where their pause button in their actual brain is, right? So they can do that. But get creative, right? What works? Do they want to make themselves a button, have that speech button, have that button on their brain, I don't know, on their watch, whatever it might be, but get creative with where a physical location of a pause button is for them. Doing that can be super helpful because you've also got the ability to model that, right? Like pause the TV and unpause. Do something silly like a dance off and, pause the TV and have them push their pause button. You can physicalize that really easily. And I think that helps a lot, right? Practicing that physical pause your body, right? Because those inhibitory behaviors, for sure, we see them come out in the body, but they often start with an emotion, right? With an emotion, with a thought, here I come, I'm doing this, right? So if we can pause the body, that's awesome. We still got work to do, but that can be a wonderful first step. Practice again at times that you don't need it, right? If you're only practicing in times, and I know this is really hard because sometimes you're in survival mode, in fight, flight, you're sitting at that level 2 on your noticing grid, and all you've got is kind of reactive time, right? You don't have proactive time. But do try to squeeze in as much proactive time as you can, because that will help you when it comes to the real deal, right? Because if we can't do it during times of lower levels of emotion showing up, smaller kind of context, it's much harder in bigger context with real heavy emotions showing up. And try to do it with things that are kind of easier to inhibit with, right? Like don't pick highly preferred things where, if video games are out and you walk out of the room, they're going to play them, right? Like start with a banana or something, think about things that are less preferred, so that inhibiting is easier, right? If that super excited emotion shows up, even though it's a light emotion, but it's really big, it might get kind of hard to carry. So try to think about things that are neutral or non-preferred to kind of practice with so that your individual's being successful. And then work your way up to those things. We know we're not going to be able to avoid highly preferred things, but if you can work on things that bring less of an emotion load, you're probably going to see a little bit more success more quickly. All right. Here's a nice visual for working on this noticer piece, right? What something happens, right? Put your noticer goggles on, push your pause button, put your noticer goggles on. Talk to me about what emotion showed up. Was it light? Was it heavy? Right? Was it was it your fun surprised emotion, your thankful emotion? You can add emotions, you can change this visual, create something that has more of a, tailored to your individual, right? So what emotions show up for them? What emotions will they label? What emotions are labeled in your home? And then something that's really important to talk about with this visual is the same things, right? Tolerate, cope, shift, compromise, ask for help, talk out loud, support you with both kinds of emotions. So again, we're looking for this quest of emotions are kind of information givers. One set of emotions isn't good and one set of emotions isn't bad. Excuse me. That's not necessarily something that we're very good at as a society, right? We kind of teach kids that all those heavy emotions are bad and we don't want to feel them. We want to get back to happy, but really what we want to get back to is contextually flexible. That level 1 on the noticing grid where we're feeling a heavy emotion or a light emotion, but we're using our tools to sustain behavior that matches that context, right? That matches it and matches well. At a funeral, we are going to feel sad, and a level 1 at a funeral is crying, blowing your nose, giving loved ones hugs, right? That's totally contextually flexible. Well, you're at the state championship of football, you're going to have mixed emotions depending upon how your team is doing, right? But you might be cheering and have light emotions, right? And that's contextually flexible to be jumping up and down and cheering, right? So there's the link to that video if you want kind of a little video about kind of why our thoughts are so negative, and emotions that show up. Your ACT Auntie is just a great resource too. There's some wonderful videos about like dropping the rope with your anxiety monster, things like that. So again, we want to think about identifying those emotions that come with impulsivity, right? What are part of the same context, right? Emotions are part of those contingencies that show up all around, all those ABCs, right? Emotions are part of those. So how can we predict what those are, the size of them? Can I carry it? Do I need relief? Can I find a space? This is another thing that I physicalize a lot with kids. I'll actually write emotions on rocks. Like we'll have a small mad, a medium mad, and a large mad. And they'll create an emotion backpack, an emotion fanny pack, whatever, a shoulder bag, something. I've actually done this with kids on bikes with pockets, but how big is that emotion? What is the size of it, right? And what you often find, right, the more emotions that show up, whether they're light or heavy, your backpack gets really heavy. So what do you need to do, right? How do I ask for support when my emotions get to be too much? Can I cope with it? Can I tolerate, right? If you're riding a bike around and you've got a bunch of heavy emotions in your pocket, like rocks, we're physicalizing it, and your pants are falling off, you need to ask for help, right? That's actually a really helpful physical way to show kids what it's like when too many emotions show up. You've got to ask for some help. Or how to get some relief, right? What am I going to do to get some relief from these emotions? And again, we want to think about supporting those degrees of freedom to promote that true choice, right? So something that's really important to them, right? They're there. What does it look like for them, right? Again, we're building this skill of tolerating emotions, of talking out loud about it, of coming up with compromises, of talking about capabilities, right? What am I capable of doing right now? So that may look different for them than it does for you, but does it work, right? Does it work? And does it work for them? Does it work for the context? Could it work for other contexts? It's okay to be a little bit different, right? That is, as long as it works for that person and the context, we should be golden. So it's okay if it looks a little different. We've never thought about it before. I've come up with some of the tools that I've got in my basket have come from kids, being like, well, why not? Why can't I try it this way? And I'm like, well, yeah, why not? Let's try it, and see what happens. And it works out great. So don't forget those degrees of freedom. All right. Of course, we're going to run out of time. But that's okay. Let's talk a little bit about this kind of overactive discoverer and weak advisor. Again, this impulsive behavior is a really challenging piece because it seems like it'd be great if we could just take that eliminative approach and get rid of that impulsive stuff, but it actually requires building up this huge repertoire of other skills. So we've really got to flip that script, and I'll probably just do another crowdcast in a couple of weeks about kind of finish up on this topic or tie it into something else. But when we're thinking about that overactive discoverer or weak advisor, right? Again, running around, trying everything, starting, never finishing, see that, touch that, I want it, take it, right? When we think about our kind of unhelpful discoverer skills, I played it safe and didn't get better at something. Those are not our guys, right? Usually our guys are not that play it safe. There might be a few contexts where that anxiety comes in, and we do play it too safe, right? But normally we're on the other side of that pendulum, which is I act impulsively and I make my life worse, right? I like to phrase it, I make my life harder. I did nothing new. I tried to avoid taking all risks and making any mistakes. And again, those are not usually our guys, except for in specific contexts, right? If you've got really high anxiety, sometimes you have very big impulsive behaviors that happen at that level 2 and level 3. But at that level 1, we're not going to do anything new, right? But we see some of that impulsive behavior when they're escalated, totally dysregulated, fight, flight, freeze. There's lots of impulsive behaviors. That I did not notice the consequence of my actions, right? I didn't take time, excuse me, I didn't take time to pause to see how that turned out, right? I didn't push my pause button to say, hey, this turned out great for me. It didn't turn out great for me. This is a stuck and shift your thinking visual, but here's a nice kind of, I bet everybody's kind of seen a behavior map before. This is different than a behavior map. There's this kind of way back to doing okay, that when you use your pause button, you've got a choice with how things turn out, right? And I'll talk about that in another one, but come back up here and we'll finish up with kind of our discoverer skills. So our helpful discoverer skills, right, are challenging ourselves to see if we could get better at something, right? Sometimes that impulsivity goes hand in hand with anxiety, right? So we aren't going to step out and challenge to see if we can do any better. I paid attention to whether or not my behavior created value, right? These are what we're trying to build, right? I liked how this turned out, right? I noticed that. I took risks and did something new to improve my life. I paid attention to those consequences. So those are all really critical skills that we're looking to build. Again, right? Like we can't just say, all right, we're getting rid of that impulsivity. We've got to say, hey, we've got to build this repertoire of tools, this repertoire of skills, and those degrees of freedom. So this visual of being stuck or shift your thinking can be really helpful when we're talking about some of this kind of overactive discoverer stuff, right? Because when we are shifting our thinking, we are sometimes overactive. We're shifting when we need to be stuck, right? When we should be using our advisor, right? And kind of stuck on those helpful rules. It's good to be stuck. This is another concept that frequently gets, we tell kids all the time we want them to be flexible thinkers, but there's another side to that where we actually want them to be stuck sometimes, right? We want them to be stuck on helpful rules that keep them safe and help them act efficiently and not so impulsively, right? That's that solid advisor, which we were going to talk about, but we kind of ran out of time. So we can teach them about this. When is it helpful to be stuck? and use your advisor? When are other times that it's helpful to shift your thinking and step into that discover space? Try something different that you've never tried before, right? You're thinking you wanted to do it this way and you're going to try it this way. Shifting your thinking, and you can just use this brain visual, to put one thing on one side and one on another. I do have a kiddo who uses a jingle. He's like, don't get distracted. Don't get distracted. I can't remember what song that actually comes from, but that's a helpful thing for him. Might be helpful for some other kiddos. Practice staying stuck and recognizing times to stay stuck, like we just talked about. And then here's kind of that behavior map that you can kind of talk through with that emotion sheet, right? All of these things go together, right? We teach these skills kind of in isolation, but then we've got to teach them how to use them all together, right? It doesn't, our lives don't happen in that linear ABC antecedent behavior consequence. It happens in multiple contingencies around us all the time. All right, I'm going to pause there, but you guys do have the rest of the information. Or actually, if people want maybe 5 more minutes, I'll quickly kind of run through this. I didn't realize there's just a little bit left. So when we're thinking about our advisor skills, those unhelpful advisor activities, I worry too much, right? I couldn't stop thinking about the past. There's that kind of time travel, right? We might predict the future too, right there. I criticize myself a lot. We hear that a lot in our impulsive guys so much, right? I'm just a bad kid. I can never do anything right. I waste a lot of time thinking about stuff that wasn't important. I told myself unhelpful things like I'm worthless or have no hope, right? Those are not helpful things. I use problem solving to improve my life, right? We see our guys plan out these amazing things, right? And then all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, why can't you plan that, right? Why was that so impulsive? We've got some really helpful advisor kind of things here, but we need to apply them in different places. I thought about the past so I could learn from my mistakes, right? Reflecting before we do, which again, our guys are pretty good at after the event, but in the actual moment without that pause, growing that pause, we have kind of a hard time with that. I thought about how I could improve at something, right? And we want to get them thinking, how can I improve at these things that I keep kind of making mistakes at, right? How can I be better at that? With, again, breaking free from I'm never going to be good at that. I could notice when my thinking was not helpful, right? I was doing too much. I was dwelling, things like that. And I told myself helpful things, right? So those are helpful kind of advisor things. Again, we want to build and strengthen those to support our ability to notice how things turn out. And again, everything kind of goes back to that noticer. So does your individual take time to notice, when they do make plans, how did they create that plan? When you see them planning something, and again, this is where that thinking in your head and talking out loud comes. When you hear them planning, right? When you know they've planned, can they notice how they did that, right? What were the steps that they used? How did it turn out? Did it turn out the way they wanted it to? And having them partner with that noticer, right? When heavy emotions show up, how could I plan differently, right? How could I step into discover space here too, even and try something different, right? Keep trying the same thing over and over again. And that's the definition of insanity, right? Helping them understand those degrees of freedom. How might different plans, come up? How can I create different plans around the same topic? And again, can I practice not in the moment, right? When those heavier emotions show up, can I practice outside of that moment? And how can I access support? I think for years in school and therapy, we've been working so much on independence, right? I think we need to make that other kind of paradigm shift to autonomy. We all access support in these skills all the time from people close to us. That's that kind of social view. We're all interconnected, right? Also, don't forget, call it out when you see it. if that's helpful to your individual. I do have a few individuals who don't like being called out when they do something right. It's actually punishing for them. So we find different ways to show them how much we appreciate that they tried something different. They stepped into that discoverer space in a helpful way, not an overactive way. So we inhibit all the time, right? Catch them doing it, and help them realize it's okay to get help. Get ahead of it if you can, right? Spend that time practicing, practice, and don't let the train leave the station if you can help it at all, right? But that again, as a parent, is really hard when you're cooking dinner, doing laundry, answering a phone call, trying to respond to emails, making sure that dog's not barking, whatever other contingencies are at play in your world at the moment. So, all right. Anyway, kind of made it through it a little bit late. I'm going to put those resources in the chat. I did want to make sure that people see up here, there's a parent feedback form. Please give us some feedback, what you would like more of, how we could make these better for you. That would be really helpful for me. So I'm going to stop sharing, and then I am going to grab that link for DNAV for everybody to have, and for Connect. There's DNAV, and then all right, here comes Connect. And we've modified a lot of the Connect curriculum for individuals in homes, and even just, lots of things. We've done lots of things with it, but it's wonderful. Anyway, thank you guys for joining me on Tuesday, and I will be back in a couple of weeks with something else. And please feel free to fill out that form and let us know what you want us to talk more about. See you later.